The Oric-1 is back on the bench, and while it technically works, the video output is, well, let's be polite and call it adequate. Today we're going to fix that, run some proper diagnostics and reward ourselves with a couple of classic games. Welcome back to Erie's 8-Bit Workshop. This is a retro rapid episode where we're revisiting the Oric-1 that we repaired previously. The machine is functional, but there are a few areas we can improve upon, starting with the video output. We last looked at this Oric in a previous episode where we brought it back to life after it suffered a ULA failure. In that episode, I used a composite-mod-to-go cable that when you plug into the composite feed to the RF can and the ground, we get a picture. But as you can see, the picture isn't that great. The reason for this is that there are no active components in the composite-mod-to-go cable. We use a 100 microfarad capacitor in line with the video signal to adjust it slightly to make it suitable to display. Today we're going to detach this and we're going to open up the can and replace the insides with a composite amplifier mod. The mod I have chosen is based around the THS-7314 video amplifier. The composite signal on an Oric is very low powered, which is why we don't get a great picture on the composite-mod-to-go cable. So we need a good amplifier to boost the signal into a better picture. The IC is a SOIC8 chip, and because soldering wires onto tiny SOIC components is very difficult, we're going to first solder it onto a breakout board. We will solder the chip onto this and then attach the wires onto the outside. You can pick these up very cheaply. They're about $3 for 5 ICs and about $1 for 10 breakout boards from AliExpress. So, when we are mounting SMD devices, the first step is magnification. Unless you have bionic eyes, a microscope or failing that a highly powered magnifying glass is an absolute must. Then put flux paste across the bed of the contacts. Place the IC in the correct location over the contacts. Make sure you have the chip pointing in the right direction, using the dot on the silk screen to orient with pin 1. This should also have either a dot or a notch on the IC. Hold the IC in place with tweezers to make sure it doesn't move while we solder. Then load your iron with just a little solder and brush it along the contacts. Go back and revisit any pins that look a little light on the solder. Now here I have unfortunately had a little too much solder and a small blob has jumped onto one of the header pin holes. That's okay, we can get it with some solder braid later. Once you have done one side, go back and repeat on the other. It's often worth doing the first pin in opposite corners to tack the IC in place first, to make sure it gets soldered into the correct position. Give it a brush with IPA and get rid of the flux, and there we have it, a nicely soldered chip. With every new skill, all it takes is practice. Lastly, let's stoke up that little blob of solder that went into the header pin hole. Set the IC aside. It's time to turn our attention to the Oric. It's out of the case and ready for us to work on the RF can. Since we are going to use the existing RF can housing, we're going to need to clear some space inside it. We can clip out all of the components, leaving just the PCB at the bottom of the can. I've tried to zoom in a little closer here, but it looks like my camera has problems with short focal distances, so sorry about the blurriness. When you remove the components, leave as much of the 2 wires that enter the can on the left-hand side as you can. We'll need these later. Here is the design of the circuit we were installing. It's lifted straight out of the product sheet for the THS-7314. Top left we have the composite in. Top right we have the amplified composite out. And the power is at the bottom. So we're going to connect the composite signal in, which is the external feed into the can that enters on the left-hand side nearest the back of the board. This goes to pin 1 on our THS-7314, and also through a 75 ohm resistor to ground. Ground is provided by the can casing. We then connect the composite video signal out on pin 8 to a 330 microfarad capacitor, and then a 75 ohm resistor. and then to the centre of the RCA socket attached to the CAN. Power is provided via the wire that enters the CAN on the left-hand side closest to the front of the board, and the CAN casing again provides ground. Lastly, to remove noise from the power line, you need both a 100 nanofarad or 0.1 microfarad capacitor and a 22 microfarad capacitor soldered across live and ground. That's pins 1 and 4. Now you can see that I'm doing all of this soldering in situ inside the CAN, but after having done this, I think it would have been a much better decision to solder all the passive components into place on the bench first, and then take the completed circuit and solder it into the CAN. Lesson learned, I think it was too fiddly. Once everything is in, visually inspect and use a multimeter to double check for any shorts, especially between live and ground. Last thing we do is want to blow something out. And here it is done. So we clipped out all of the components on one side of the CAN and soldered in the circuit. We can now take out the composite signal directly from the CAN. Here is a before and after to show you the difference. Now it's never going to be as clean as the signal you'll get from the RGB, and that's understood. It is a composite signal after all, but it does give you a much better output than we had originally. And that's that. Let's put the CAN lid back on and a label so we know that it's now a composite rather than RF signal. So that's the composite mod complete. Okay, let's take a look at the diagnostic ROM and board. Okay, this is all the work of Mike Brown, and I've placed the URL to Mike's site below. I'll start off with the IC sockets and IDC connectors. Then the resistors. The capacitors, the timing crystal, the address line LEDs, and the jumper headers. Then in with the ICs and we're done. Now that we've completed the board, let's turn our attention to the loopback plugs. The printer loopback plug is actually part of the diagnostic board, so you don't need to worry about that one apart from plugging it in, unless of course you wish to use the diagram without the diag board, in which case you'll need to create a loopback plug. The diagram for the loopback plug is on the schematic. It's pretty simple to create if you have an IDC plug ready to go. Moving on to the cassette loopback, this is just a 7-pin DIN, with pins 1 and 6 connected and pins 5, 3 and 7 connected. Pretty straightforward. For the keyboard loopback, Mike Brown has suggested using an IDC socket again. However, I found that using a female header pin actually gives a better result. Here's what mine looks like. You just use the header pins and then use female jumper wire to connect everything together. And this is it, finished and programmed. Now, Mike has been kind enough to make the board design freely available, but his preference for tools is CAD. Eagle used to have a free version, but this is going to be withdrawn shortly, so I thought I'd better convert the design into KiCad while I still can. I figured that having it in KiCad format would keep the design accessible. This is the first build of that design. I made one error in this, and that's I've silk screened pin 1 and 32 the wrong way around. So you have to plug the cable in backwards in order for it to work, but it does still work. You can put the diag ROM directly into the Oric and run it there, or you can have it in the diag board. Now the 27C512 can contain 4 ROM images, and these are selectable via jumpers on the diag board, but not when it's installed inside. So I have basic 1.0, the Oric-1 version, 1.1, the Atmos version, and a fairly recent version, 1.22 from 2001, as well as the diag ROM 1.08. It's designed to be run with the board all the way out of the case with the keyboard detached, and we're going to put in the various loopback cables as we run. So I'm going to unplug this and plug this back in and switch it on. And the first thing that happens is that it tests the RAM, and we progress through the test by pressing the NMI button. Periodically it will tell you to fit loopback connectors, and I have the cassette loopback here. Now, one of the things I don't like about this is it's awkward to use the printer loopback from the board. You have to twist the cable and stand the board up on its side, and it just about fits. So the tape and printer loopbacks are fitted, and it's going to test those. Now I do think it may be worthwhile redesigning the board so that the printer loopback port is next to the main data IDC cable. Something to think about anyway. Oh, the speaker's working, and now we can remove the printer loopback and put the board down again. Now, unfortunately, I've just jabbed the NMI button and the test has failed. Unfortunately, it won't proceed past a failure and you have to start it all over again, so I'll fast forward through to the next bit. Speaker is working. The sweep test takes quite a long time. Time for an 8x speed up. Now we have the loopback on the keyboard. We can put this in place on the component side with all of the spare pins to the right hand side towards the speaker. That's in, press go, it tested, and we need to remove the keyboard. That's all the tests passed. Now the other thing that I've noticed about this board is it does have a reset button that pulls the reset line to 0. This is quite a useful little add-on, especially if you have a faulty reset circuit, as we did in the last video, where we used a jumper wire to short pins 1 and 40 of the CPU to force a reset. If I change these jumpers and select one of the external basic images, plug it in, and it resets. So rather than unplugging the power, you can use the button. Anyway, the Oric is working well and it's time to pop it back into its case. And now it's time to test out some games. Now we have a decent video and we know it's fully working. I've chosen 2 games to have a quick demo of today. The first one is a fairly recent game called Oric-1 by Defence Force. Through the magic of editing, it takes seconds to load rather than 6 minutes. Oh, by the way, in theory, since the diag board can host a copy of the Atmos ROM, there's no reason why it can't play Atmos games. Anyway, back to Oric-1. It has a strange screen calibration stage after loading. I'm not sure I understand why this is required. Then we get a short backstory and onto the game. It's a Iridium style game. You have to fly over switches on the mothership. Once all the switches are in the right direction, the mothership explodes and it's on to the next stage. The second game is one of my all-time favourite Spectrum games. It's a really good port of Manic Miner. I don't know if the Oric naturally has the colour clashes of the Spectrum, but they seem to have replicated it. The music and sound effects are good, and there is a volume control so you can turn the music down when you're fed up with it. It's such a cool game, and genuinely one I can still sit down for a gaming session. I've put the links to both games in the descriptions below. One ongoing challenge is reliably loading Oric software via the Mac. I still haven't found a dependable Mac software that can directly play the Oric TAP files. So my workaround is to convert them from TAP to WAV on Windows, copy them to the Mac, and then play using the QuickTime player. One thing I have discovered is that the playback software really matters. For example, VLC distorts the audio just enough that Oric often fails to recognize it at all. QuickTime, however, works reliably. And so, with improved composite video, a fully working diagnostic board and some classic games running perfectly, the Oric-1 is now in excellent shape. Well, if you've enjoyed this revisit, please do leave a like and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss the next video. If you have any tips on diagnosis for the Oric-1, I'd love to read up on them. And thank you very much for watching Erie's 8-Bit Workshop, and I'll see you next time. See ya.